I didn't know she's having all this much trouble.
No, I can't sit down. If I sit down, I'll get so stiff and I can't get up.
Yep, now you're getting so big I can't pick you up.
Oh.
Yeah, you didn't have to say that.
Yep. I'm talking about you.
Yep.
Okay, we're in the home of Velma and Sam Pack, and Velma's maiden name was Lowry, and her father worked in the mine. And Velma, what was your birthday? What's your birthday?
January 13, 1923 mines. And when the Clifty mines went down, he went to work in Ravenscroft, and we moved here when I was about 2.5 years old.
Okay, and what was your dad's name?
Tom Lowry.
Okay. And your mother's name was?
Grace Cooley.
And how many children did they have?
They had 9.
9. Were they all raised here in Ravenscroft mostly?
Well, the first one died when she was just about a month old from that, what they call cradle, what is it?
The SIDS, the cradle death? Or?
Yeah. And I was born, me, my oldest brother, and me, and the brother next to me were all born at Clifty. Edward and Jack. And then Debbie J, Maxine, Sue, and Penny. Well, I had a sister born in 36, the year the mines shut down, and she died when she was 19 months old. And then there was Sue Holman, and Gary, Larry, or we all called him Penny. And so the mines, I was 13-year-old when the mines shut down.
What was it like? Did you go to school at Ravenscroft School then?
Yes.
Tell us about a school day. What was an average day like when you went to school?
Well, teachers were stricter then than they are now. But we had recess about 10 o'clock in the morning. Then we had our lunch period. And then about 2 o'clock in the evening we had a recess. And of course the kids all went out, and some played ball, and some of the girls, we used to have what we called playhouses at the back of the schoolhouse. They would let us, fix up a little something there. But all the kids that were big enough played ball. And we had 4 different spaces on the school field, or ball fields for the different ages.
Now, is this at the first Ravenscroft School?
That's the first Ravenscroft
Up by
School.
Bill Williams' house behind
Yeah.
you? Okay. Did you go to the new Ravenscroft School?
No. No, I was, my kids went to the new Ravenscroft School. I don't remember what year it was built. Do you?
Built the year after me knew I married, right after the old school out there, remember? And then they built that one.
And we had
Same time they built the one at Bon Air.
at the old school, we had a big bell on top of the school. And they rang that bell every morning. And the first bell meant that the school was open. And the second bell meant you needed to be there. If you waited for the third bell, you were late. And then they rang the bell one time for each recess to let out. And then when it was time to go in, they rang the bell. And then they had 2 bells the same way during the lunch period.
Did you ever get in trouble at school?
No.
Did
No,
you ever see anybody get a whipping?
Yes. I've seen several of them.
How did they whip them?
They whipped them with a switch.
Where did they whip them? On the legs or the...
They just, well, yes, I'd say most of them I ever seen was just whipped around their bottom and their legs.
What was the day like for your dad? What time did he get up in the morning?
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
And he drove a motor in the mines, pulling coal, and I guess taking when the cages would take the men down, he took them to the different entries where they worked. That's what they called them in the mines at that time, entries where they cut into a new
Turned
vein.
off place.
Like a new room.
New room.
Yeah.
what the cages that you talk about, that's like what we would think of as an elevator?
Uh-huh.
How did it work?
Well,
Steam and rope.
It had,
One went up, one went down.
So it's like a dumbwaiter, like?
Yeah.
uh-huh,
Okay.
and oh, the ropes were huge,
And they put the mules on there and everything?
yeah, to take them down. And in the spring, most everybody put out a little garden, because a lot of the places they just had just a yard and a garden, but most everybody put out their gardens, and they would let them. They would loan the mules out. They had some of the boys that would take the mules, and they were allowed to use them to plow whoever wanted their garden plowed. And they broke it up like that. And otherwise, they used just rakes and hoes for gardening.
What did your dad do when the mines closed down?
Well, he stayed around here for a while. Well, no, he didn't stay too long. He went to Briceville, Tennessee, and he worked up there for a while. And he went to, Sam, what's the name of that place where Arable and
Fork Mountain.
he worked at Fork Mountain for several
Is
years,
this coal mine and steel?
coal mine. And well, in between those times, he worked on WPA, you know, the program that President Roosevelt founded. And then they left here and they went to West Virginia, and they lived up there that was after I was married, that they moved to West Virginia. And they lived up there from, I don't know what year they went up there, about 40, I think they went up there about 1947, and they came back in 1954. And because he worked at Ed White, West Virginia, and the mines, it was the mines, and the mines shut down up there, and so they moved back down here.
What did he die of?
He died from cancer of the lung. Well, he had cancer all over, but
Black lung, they call it.
it started in his lungs.
Now, this area where you and Sam lived in, what was this part of the community then? What was this area?
Well, at that time, it was all white. But the blacks, they did have blacks that lived up in here, and they moved them out to, some of them went to Bonaire and some of them went to Sparta. And the Carl Rowan family,
They went to McMinnville.
they went to McMinnville, and that's where he got his schooling, was in the McMinnville school system.
Now, when it was the black community out here, what all did they have?
Well, they had a hotel for the miners that didn't live in the community, because, you know, transportation then was hard. And they had a school, and they were allowed to do their buying at the company store or go to Sparta like a lot of people did. And I don't know, I can't say that I can't remember too many of the blacks, and I can't remember the blacks living up here, but I can remember seeing them in the company store.
What was, when your dad got up at 4 in the morning, he ate a big breakfast? Do you remember
Well,
having, or?
Yes, back then, you know, we didn't have the canned biscuits and all. Mama always got up and she made biscuits and would just fry, I guess you'd call it side bacon. Well, at the store they called it white meat, but it was, it hadn't been smoked. And of course, Mom always made gravy and fried sweet potatoes, and sometimes fried Irish potatoes. And I can remember a lot of times of eating corn for breakfast, which we don't ever do now, but people did do that back then. And and in the summertime, if we had anything in the garden to can, she always put that up. And like green beans and made kraut and canned tomatoes and things like that that you could put up and keep in the can. course, they didn't have any way of freezing anything then. And
What did he take his lunch to the mines?
yes.
What did he take it in?
Well, they had aluminum buckets, and they had a place in the bottom of the bucket for your water, and they had what they called a basin, and that set down in there. And Mom always put his sandwiches in the basin, and then his dinner bucket had a little tray then that sat on top of that basin that you could put cake or pie or anything like that, and then the lid. I remember Daddy had a hole punched in his bucket, and he had a little plug that he would put in there when he wanted to drink of water. Instead of having to take it all apart, he would just pull that little plug out and drink out of it, and then put the plug back in.
The basin was a lid to his water bucket.
Okay.
And then
You carried your water in the mines, just sweep it. That's the reason they use the well you get water out of both ends of it. He wouldn't take his water in the mine. If he went close to that, he'd just go by and get it out of the well.
Okay.
What a handy something to
Yeah.
run into.
And during the summertime, they had to wear extra clothing. Like at this time of year, most everybody wears their long johns. But in the summertime, you had to put on your long johns and your top clothes. And he wore a mining cap with a lamp on it. And in the summertime, he would take a bath at the mines, because the little houses they had over there, of course, there was no insulation or anything in them, and they could get water from the steam room. Well, I think, I remember being up in there one time on Sunday evening. A lot of times they would go over and they would watch Mr. Alston. He was a blacksmith, and you could watch him do some of the work that he had to do. And George Hutchins, he run the steam room, the boiler room, I guess you call it. And they had a spigot or two. Back then we called them hydrants. And they had them run down in there where they didn't have to carry their bath water so far. But in the wintertime, Daddy always come home and took a bath and hung his mining clothes outside.
Did his clothes get wet in the mines? Did he get wet? Of course, he ran the motor, you said.
Yeah, well, sometimes he would
there's
come
always
home
Water.
and his legs would be wet, you know, and of course his clothes would be real dirty, and his face and hands would be just as dirty as the coal.
Do you remember him getting sick from it, or in the winter when his clothes would be wet, or do you remember him being sick very often?
No, I don't remember him ever being sick with a cold too much. And
Did the children get sick a lot?
well, no, we never were sick too often. And at that time, the doctor, if one of the kids got sick, like tonsillitis or just a cold, and back then, of course, we had all the diseases of measles and whooping cough and such as that. But the doctor, Dr. Vernon Hutton, he would come to the house and visit the kids, and or if it was just some little something, you might take them down to the office and he would give them the medicine that they needed.
Now, do I understand right that you all didn't have to pay him each visit? The pay came out of the paychecks of the miners? It was taken out like a
No,
fee?
the company
The company?
paid the doctor.
Okay,
Well, it was
No.
held out of the pay,
Yes.
wasn't it? So much for a month,
I think so.
so much a month for the doctor.
And the
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
Well, you paid so much a month school fee,
And I think childbirth was $10 extra.
and he always went to the house to deliver the babies, and so.
Did the blacksmith work right at the mule barn, or did he have a
No,
separate?
it was on the left of the road, over close to
Next to
the
the boilers.
boiler room.
Okay.
They had what they called a machine shop, and the machine shop and the boiler room was
Don't right there together, just about.
yeah, but it was back this side.
Yeah,
what would I
between
call
the
it?
road and the shaft is where the,
The, Thaddeus Austin was the blacksmith.
Did you ever go around there much? Did children go around the mining area very often, or?
Well, like I said, sometimes on Sunday evening they would just get out walking, you know, and Mr. Hutchins, I remember he took a group of us through the boiler room, and it had all these big pipes, you know, running in every direction, and he kept that going. And they had enough steam that the houses in the lower end of the community had electricity, but they didn't have enough steam to put electricity in all of them. Now, we had electricity when we lived in the lower end. When we first come to Ravenscroft, we lived in a 2-room house, and then we lived on the side where Gene Cody lives, and we moved across the street then. I can't remember his, gee, I almost said it. Anyway, Norbell Bars, her husband got hurt in the mines, and they lived in that house where I showed you that we used to live in. And she was from down in the valley somewhere. She was kin to the Selby's down in there. And Mr. Bars couldn't work anymore. He was on crutches and in a wheelchair. And they moved, and when they moved, the company let us move across into a bigger house because there was 5 of us kids. And,
Then you lived there most of the time? Did you move again?
then we moved down, let's see, it was during the war that we moved from there down on the front street down there where, in the house that burned, 4-room house that burned. Mom and Daddy moved down there. And
Do you remember the day that the mine closed? Do you remember anything about it, or do you remember your dad coming home that day, or anything?
well, it closed, the best I remember, I don't think it closed on the first day of April. I think they extended it about 2 weeks. The best I remember of hearing them talk, you know. And they, a lot of people, they were gonna organize the mines with the union, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people blame the union with the mine shutting down. But then I've heard older people, and my grandpa worked at the mines, and he was one of the bosses in the mines. And I've heard him talk about it, Oscar Cooley. And I've heard others talk about it, and they said it was poor management of the company because they bought a lot of equipment to put in the mines where the coal was too low to use the equipment. And they put a lot of
Investment in
rails down, and they couldn't use it, and they just went in debt a lot. And I've heard that story told about it wasn't the union that closed the mines down, because the mines was in bad shape before the union ever thought about coming in. And of course they didn't make very much. I know Daddy's worked many times, not just Daddy but others, for $2.50 a day. And like he run the motor, and he got to work a lot of days, and that he got his $2.50. But I had an uncle that dug coal, and if you hit a place where there was a lot of rock in the room, all that rock had to be moved out of there before they could shoot the coal, and they didn't get any pay for digging and loading that rock.
So they got paid when they got coal out?
They got paid for what coal. And each, I wish I knew where they were. Each man had a tag that he put on his, let me see, I think I got that. Here's 180. Now, when you filled your car with coal, if that was your number, you hung it on there. Here's one with 371. Here's one with 118. and here's one with 131. But and then that was their number on their slip that they got from the check office, and they had a little card, about like a postcard, and it was fixed with the Ravenscroft mining name on it, you know, and you could take that to what they call the script office during the week, and you could draw out script and take that up to the company store and spend it. But if you was lucky enough to make enough that you didn't have to draw out your script, every 2 weeks they paid off in greenback like we have today.
Bring
But
us
you
close, Linda. Let's see. And Jason, take a picture too. Right.
So just metal pieces with numbers on them. This is 118, 180, 181,
And that's how they tallied how much coal they had broke that day.
371. They hung this on their
Peg.
peg.
This one you have to go around and take a picture.
Now, you were talking about the script. Is that the same thing as clatter? Clatter was it the same thing, or was script more like a written note?
No, the dollars were about like this, and they were a lead color, and they had the Ravenscroft.
And you could only spend the clatter at the company store. Is
Well,
that-
you could take it to Sparta, and some of the merchants are like you needed $10 in cash, and you give them $15 in the company script, and they would give you $10.
But you couldn't take it to the company and exchange it. Could you take it to the company and exchange your clatter for money if you had to have greenbacks?
Well, yes, I suppose you could.
I mean, but it sounds like if they
But-
did that and lost money in the trade because
But they like for everybody to buy everything they needed
from the store,
from the store.
from the company.
And some people had, hogs, and some a cow, and they kept hog feed and
Stuff
cow
like that.
feed, bales of hay that would come in on the train, and they kept that, and you could buy pieces of furniture and like mattresses and different
They said
things like
anything
that.
that you wanted, you could buy, and they might have to order it.
Order it,
But you could buy. Did they have catalogs that you could look at, or did you just go in and say, I want?
No, I never seen a catalog.
Okay.
But they kept, at the company store, they kept shoes and different overall pants, underwear. I can't ever remember of seeing a woman's dress in there, but they kept the material. They kept.
And everybody women sewed, and
they had a long, on one side of the store, it was shoes and clothes and material for clothing. And of course you remember, I don't know whether you girls remember or not, but they used to keep oilcloth to cover the table. That was on one side. And then at Christmas time they had toys. And back then, Christmas time is about the only time you ever saw apples and oranges and bananas and nuts and such as that. But they always had that for the Christmas season. And just simple toys, dolls for the girls, and guns and such as that for the boys. These little cap guns.
how did the miners feel about the company? Did they resent the fact that the company wanted to pay them in script and clatter and all that? Was there any resentment there, or did they appreciate because the company paid for the doctor and the school. I know you paid for it out of your
Well, I never
check, but
I never heard ever heard any complaints about it because
it was just a way of life.
it was just a way of life, but they you could go down to the, as I said, they called it the script office because that's where all your cars of coal went into that, and then that was counted up as to what you had made. But like I said, if you didn't have coal, if you didn't load coal, you didn't get paid for the rock. And
Who got paid the most money in the mine? I mean, you know, more or less like there are all kinds of different jobs like mule skinners and chalk eyes and the actual miner, and you said your dad ran motors or was like an engineer, and there was so they told us what they call it, a checker.
Yeah.
Is that what that was the person who tallied your coal and all
Yes.
that?
Steel was a checker.
You know, according to what we've read, the miner really had the best pay, but because that's the hardest job.
yeah, they brought their coal up on the cage and they put it on a track and they took it out and emptied it in one of the cars. But when the car come up on the cage, they took that tag off, and whatever number you had, your statement always had that number. You were given a certain number. You didn't just use
So those
one
were
number
the
to-
tags that you marked your carts of coal with.
You hung that on your car of coal.
And it had been known in that mine that somebody would steal your tag and put his on it.
And when they caught somebody, what would happen?
I don't know, but I think one of the men called it, the feller.
I don't know about
I won't
that.
call that name because he still got relatives.
Okay. But what would the company do? Fire them? I mean, you know,
Company
no.
fire you right quick or something like that.
I'd say the miners would get highly upset.
If they didn't fire him, the miners, I would take him out here and give him a whipping.
Another job we heard of was the chalk eye. You remember?
That was the heifer mines. If you had coal on a contract, load coal, if you hired somebody and taken him in to work, he went in there and helped and you paid him.
And so
He got paid, you got paid for what coal you loaded and what coal he loaded, but
And it was usually a
that's
younger,
most of it is to give him a job and give him some experience.
okay, younger person probably usually.
Younger person.
What about a trapper?
The trapper was one to open and shut the gates, the doors, to make the air circulate right. Yeah, Velma's daddy went in the mines as a trapper when, what was it?
11-year-old.
11?
and I had a
What would
question.
they do with a fella now to put an 11-year-old boy in a coal mine?
Where was he at when he was working at that age?
Bonaire.
Bonaire? Because did he not go to school? Because I know that they really sent their kids to school and wanted them to get an education.
He went to the 4th grade. And of course there was a big family of them, you know, and as each one of them got old enough to, really he wasn't old enough, but he went in with driving a mule. And I've heard him say that when they would bring the mules out of the mines, they have to blindfold them because
Only blindfold one eye.
because they can't see.
Just one
After-
eye?
After being in there.
And he could see out there. When he went back in the mine, he pulled this one off. And he could see from this eye. The light didn't blind.
After being in the mines all day in the dark, when they brought them out, you know, it was.
And how long did they have to, did they keep the mules like that all the time then, or just for a little
They had
while?
nothing mules, they said they swapped out with them. And so when mule stayed down there so long, and then he come out and they put another mule in his place.
I want to go back for just a minute. You talked about as a kid going into the boiler room and all that. We were told that women were never allowed in the mine. Tell
Well,
us about that just a little bit. Were
No,
kids allowed? I mean, you know, as a girl, were you allowed in the mine?
No, I never. I've heard them talk that somebody that lived away from here come in here one time, and they let her go down in the mines. And after that, they had an accident, and a man got killed. And after that, they never allowed a woman to go down in the mines. Now,
Or a girl.
no kids or.
Okay.
And now I've been to the holes where the cages went down, and they used to have a fountain right there between the cages, and that water come up from down below, and it was just like ice water.
You're looking for a cool place in summertime, stick your head over and look down.
Mr. Klaus, Beecher Klaus, he used to run the cages, and he worked the night shift. And
Well,
he had two girls, Vita and Helen.
Bud Grimm used to run it too, didn't
Who?
he? Bud Grimm.
I don't know about him, but Mr. Klaus run it on the night shift. And a lot of times Miss Klaus would fix his dinner, or would fix his supper. And Helen and Vita would take that to the mines, and sometimes we were friends, and sometimes we would be up there. And I would get to go to the mines with them, and
But just go to where the cages were.
and Mr. Klaus would always be there, and we'd take his dinner to
Yeah.
him.
What
Night
did you-
shift. I want to hear about that.
What about the night shift? We haven't heard of a night shift. What's that?
Well, they went in and worked at night, just like they did during the day.
Did they have 2 shifts or 3?
They just had the two. But now, I said they went in. I don't know that they dug coal at night,
But I can see why somebody would need to do the cages all the time.
but they had to keep the machinery running.
What they done with the machine, and run that machine, it'd go up, and it'd be just like kind of like a chainsaw is today, only it was a lot bigger. They'd run that machine up to that face of that coal, and then they'd go across with it. And they'd cut the coal out on the bottom of the place about like this, then they'd shoot it from the top, and drop it down, and bust all the pieces.
So that's what they do at night.
You walk up to the face of the coal with a pick, and he all over hit it, and it rang just like you'd hit a piece of steel.
But, go ahead.
We appreciate you talking with us today. We've got to go, but
I've enjoyed it.
I know that you enjoy thinking back about times and everything. And we just want to preserve it.
picture of that old
Keep on.
picture.
And something else I'll tell you, they never had a church house. They always had church in the old schoolhouse. And the Methodists and the Baptists, they met at 10 o'clock in the morning and had their Sunday school, and at 2 o'clock in the evening, the Church of Christ had their church. Because I used to go to church on Sunday twice a day. There wasn't anything else to do. And then occasionally the company would have somebody come in and show, they were silent movies, and you know the writing would be across under the picture. And they used to show them at the old schoolhouse. That wasn't very often, and I remember one time that Uncle Dave Macon, and I can't tell you who was with him, but he came here and put on a show in the old schoolhouse. And on Christmas, they always had a big Christmas tree up on the stage and had it decorated and fixed. And the company fixed sacks for all the children. There's one for every, and they all got real, you know, they were the big sacks. And they got candy and nuts and fruit. And they always had a Santa Claus. Because I know Jess England and Hollis England, they were big fellas. And they filled out that Santa Claus suit. And they always had him to come in from the back of the house, and he'd come in with a bag on his back and little trinkets in it, you know, that he'd hand out to the little kids. And then the Sunday school classes, because I know Minnie Cobb was my Sunday school teacher. I remember one Christmas she had us to bring a matchbox, what we call them. They were a nickel a box then. She had each one of us to bring her a matchbox. And then she took crepe paper, and she'd take that crepe paper and stretch it, and she'd glue it in the center here and make a ruffle around, except on the end where it opened, and she'd let it go across the top. And she would always put us some kind of a little gift in there, maybe just a handkerchief or just some little something like that. but she always did that on her own. But she was my Sunday school teacher. She was a Baptist and her husband Ben was a Methodist, but they went to church
That makes a
together.
good combination.
But like I said, the Church of Christ met at 2 o'clock in the evening, and there wasn't anything else to do, so me and Nana England, Lucille Black, and all of us, we just go to church Sunday morning, then go back Sunday evening.
Is there a piano in the community anywhere?
Oh yeah, the school had a piano, and Mary Prater, from down from down Cherry Creek,
Oh,
Well, we don't have it anymore.
she
old
played
as
the
a walkway step.
She played the piano every morning. You went in to your room, and then she played a march, and you marched into the big room and took a seat. And we had chapel. We had Bible reading and singing, and always
Oh,
had
that's
prayer.
all right.
And then she played the march, and you marched back to your room.
And this is at school, not,
This was at school. We did that every morning. And it seems so strange now that they can't have prayer and chapel and all in school. It's,
You was try that down at that school down there now and have the FBI there next morning.
I
No,
think that's,
it'd be somebody else.
That- You know what? That's part of our problem today.